The most interesting part of the chapter is the following part of the conversation, and that is Hello and welcome for my review of Boku no Hero My Hero Academia chapter 341, and at the end of the video my prediction for next week's chapter 342. So, my review a bit late, but Boku no Hero being on a short break, we will get the next chapter only next week, so my prediction should still be in time. So this chapter focused on the villains, especially the core of the villains, the former Vanguard squad, particularly on the three members Himiko Toga in the first part, then also in the center of the chapter on Toya Todoroki, alias Dabi, and lastly on Spinner, the lizard-looking guy. So I did not predict last week that we would get another chapter focusing on the villains, that we would get another chapter that is focusing on the characters. When the chapter opened up and I saw the scene switching back to the villains, I was kind of disappointed at first. That was not what I wanted. I just wanted the story to move on with Class A, to see them move out and to see some action again. But maybe I'm just a little bit greedy here after we all have been spoiled with that amazing fight of Stars and Stripes versus Shigaraki. This chapter was again one that built the character, that gave us character building, character showcase. This time, not the hero side, but the villain side. Ultimately, it was a chapter that I actually enjoyed, to my surprise. The chapter starts off with Himiko visiting her old parents' house, her home, that clearly had been demolished and sprayed and tagged with words like get lost, die, demon, and so on. She pretty much emotionless wanders through the house while snippets of memories that she got of things that were said to her in her past seem to go through her mind. She ultimately ends up in a room that seems to be her room. She seems to remember her old bed, maybe her childhood days, and we see her having that memory of a fantasy of a little bird dancing on her stomach and scratching her stomach open and performing kind of like a bloody dance in her abdomen. I don't really understand what's the symbolism of this. If she's just supposed to have a screwed fantasy of violence, be it violence directed at herself or violence directed at others, kinda hard to interpret. But we were shown at different points in the story that quirks seem to coincide with character, with personality. So certain specific quirks, abilities seem to go along with a certain personality and vice versa. Her quirk being blood related seems to have led her to have some kind of obsession with blood, or maybe her obsession with blood might have led her to develop this kind of quirk. Enjoyment of torture or self-torture and pain, I don't know if that has been a dimension to her quirk before, or her personality. As she leaves the house, Dabi, alias Toya Todoroki, having seemingly had an eye on her, watching her and her actions, is confronting her and seemingly trying to make sure she's still on board. And when he asks her, "You sure you're ready for what's coming?" she responds with, "And what might that be?" Toya says, "Us putting an end to this rotten world." And after giving a few more words, he burns down her family house, kind of like a symbol to move on into a future of burning down anything that stands for the current values. That's my interpretation. The most interesting part of the chapter is the following part of the conversation, and that is that Toya seemingly got a hold of a small vial of twice blood, which, as we all know, is the basis for Himiko being able to use her ability. And her ability being not just to take on the form and shape of the one whose blood she ingests, but also now being able to take on that person's quirk. And with twice as quirk being to multiplicate, to duplicate things and people along with their quirk. This is a big thing. As we remember, Hawk specifically took out twice for his dangerous quirk to potentially multiply, to duplicate already dangerous villains and give the villains a huge edge over the heroes. Let's imagine seeing someone like Shigaraki or All for One being duplicated, even if the resulted duplicate would have a fraction of the original's power and ability in terms of strength. These duplicates should be way above the usual villain, and the potential to possibly be able to produce an infinite amount of duplicates, an infinite large army of Shigarakis. That's something that might pose a real threat to any of the strategies and the plans of the heroes, and to the Japanese government to fight and put a stop to Shigaraki, the villains, and All for One. So I'm really intrigued. I really like this way of raising the stakes, of giving the reader a sense of there is a danger that is not achieved by sheer power-ups, simply by leveling up, by strengthening the villains, by giving Shigaraki the power creep, but through intelligent use of almost forgotten technology or abilities, in this case Twice's quirk, which changes the way the villains might pose a threat. The scene changes to Spinner and All for One, and this one guy from the Meta Liberation Army, the one with the long hair that covers his eyes, imposes upon Spinner his future role, while we see Shigaraki cowering on the ground, seemingly being in pain. And All for One comes approaching and explaining that he is recovering and seemingly reaching quirk singularity, which is a term that was thrown around quite a bit, and what that means at the current time is not known, but it seems to be a point where quirks reach a point of no return, where quirks become so strong that they can no longer be controlled by humans or change humans altogether. So what quirk singularity means is still up to theory, I think. This is the part of the chapter that I like the least. I think Shigaraki, having been nerfed for the sake of being combatable, to be on a level that is not completely out of reach for our current heroes, even for Deku. This recovery seems to me to negate the efforts and the meaning of Stars and Stripes' efforts. In terms of storytelling, it feels like taking 2 steps forward, taking 2 steps backwards, and then 2 steps forward again. Shigaraki gets stronger, he gets weaker, he gets stronger. He gets beat up by Deku. He recovers only to get more quirks. He gets stronger in his fight with Stars and Stripes, gets nerfed and gets some of his quirks destroyed. Now recovering and supposedly reaching quirk singularity. It's this back and forth, this power up and power down. To me, Shigaraki feels like the stock market. It's a slide up and down, but overall, the general course is growth, economic growth. And we don't see that growth with the heroes right now, and power levels escalate quicker than we get any matchup. It's not like we see Shigaraki getting one boost, one power up after a big fight, after a big event, over the course of hundreds of chapters. Here we see characters getting boosts, getting power-ups in quick succession right after another. And this is just going way too quick for me. I would rather see the plot, the actual story accelerate a bit more. I would like to see chapters being dedicated to developing story rather than showing us power-ups and showing us Shigaraki becoming stronger and being this unstoppable monster. And here's my prediction for next week's chapter. I predict for next chapter everything that I predicted for this week's chapter. I predict and I hope that the focus will finally move away from character exposition, be it on the hero's side or on the villain's side, and to move on with the plot. I predict more focus on Class A, on the group around Deku, moving out and taking on some challenges. I don't see them clashing yet with the villains. I don't see them clashing with the League of Villains, but maybe to see them work together as a team and around Deku, supplementing him, seeing them take on some minor villains to show how they work together and how strong they are and how they've grown as a team, but also as individuals with their quirks respectively. Maybe a bit soon, but at the end of next chapter, chapter 342, but more likely towards next week's chapters, 443, 444, we might see some confrontations with the League of Villains, some final confrontations getting initiated or getting built up. As looking back at All Might's speech, how to take on Shigaraki and All for One, the story seems to build towards that, seems to build towards one-on-one encounters between the heroes and the villains. So a bit of a mid to long-term prediction beyond next chapter, chapter 342. I want to predict some encounters for our heroes and the League of Villains. So, some likely matchups. So, the first matchup that I think we can clearly see is, of course, the main protagonist, Deku, versus the main antagonist, Shigaraki. And I don't think Deku's matchup will be all for one, as Deku and Shigaraki mirror each other way more. They're closer in age. They have similarities in their upbringing, their development, and there has been made that parallel in his mind. For All for One, being the true villain, the true mastermind behind all the chaos, behind all the current villains, he seems to be someone who I don't think is going to be taken on by Deku currently, but either A, by one of the adult, already established pro-heroes, maybe even All Might, finding a way to return to his prime muscle form for final confrontation, which I believe is something many fans would like to see, or through combined efforts of Deku and Shigaraki. A matchup for Shoto Todoroki, of course, will be his older brother. I think we can see that clearly. I think there might be some initiative, some early phase of a matchup with Shoto and his father, Endeavor, fighting together versus Toya, alias Dabi. But I think the fight will boil down to a one-on-one between the brothers. And we will get to see how their quirks fare. We will see Shoto's half hot, half cold, his fire and ice quirk being pitted against Toya's strong blue fire quirk, which was stated to be way stronger than Endeavor's flames, but being too strong to handle for his own body, for Toya's body, so he would damage himself. Next, Bakugo. Whose matchup Bakugo's will be, that's hard to say, as currently I don't see any one of the villains, at least not from the Vanguard squad, Shigaraki's core group, to be on one level with Bakugo and seeming to have some kind of analogy to Bakugo. But on the other hand, Bakugo is too much of a big character, too important, too pivotal to the story to be just left out and not to be given a major matchup. He might have a confrontation with Nomu, one or several, but the Nomu being kind of faceless and not invoking any emotional connection for the reader. I think we won't see Bakugo having his big face-off, his big match with a Nomu. He might have a match with, and that's kind of big, All for One, as that is the only big person, the big villain that seems to be left as a big antagonist for Bakugo. But I have kind of a feeling that the mangaka has something planned for Bakugo, something special, different from the other heroes. There have been these series that the second user of All for One, who appeared in the Vestige world of Deku, might actually be Bakugo, a relative to Bakugo, or maybe Bakugo himself having been sent back in time for in some way, which would tie the importance of his character kind of together and make it a nice loop, would be a brilliant way to give value to him and his character. But that would also mean that Deku's still not shown last quirk, his last ability of his All for One quirk, might be Bakugo's quirk. Another matchup, I think, that is an easy prediction, and many already see, is Uraraka Ochako, aka Uravita, having a matchup with Himiko. For some of the other characters, I think it's harder to see a matchup or an individual matchup for each of them. I could imagine Fumikage from Class A, the one with the bird head, having a matchup with Spinner from the villains, due to both of them being different from usual humans, that it is not something that is tied to their quirk, but just an innate appearance of them, both not looking human. Spinner looking like a lizard and Fumikage looking like a bird. Also, Ida, being one of the more important characters of Class A, might get his own matchup with someone, but there seems to be not so many characters on the villain side left to give a matchup. So for the sake of providing matchups, maybe we will see some of the characters that had been defeated or seemingly taken out, ones who had been arrested, coming back to the side of the villains. And I'm talking here about some of the Meta Liberation Army characters like Geto or Gigantomachia or Gigantomachia, as these two characters just seem too strong and too nice of a possible matchup for heroes to be just taken out of commission. I don't see everyone of the lesser important characters, even the class and the other heroes, to have a personal matchup. So I think it will rather boil down to something else that I think has been hinted at in the previous chapters, and that is the importance of teamwork and heroes working together, binding together to take down the bigger threat. So rather than seeing each one of the heroes having their individual fight, for some of them we might rather see them giving an effort through supplementing the other heroes and supplementing and assisting Deku, showing us, the reader, that even though Deku is insanely strong, he cannot save the day all by himself. He still needs to rely on his friend and other heroes. Being a hero might mean to rely on others and to work together as a team, as a society. Kinda like everyone can be a hero and everyone will be a hero. That was my review of last chapter and my prediction for the next chapter, and my mid to long term predictions for the series. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening. I hope you had fun, and goodbye.